I was lying in bed one night, unable to sleep, when a memory resurfaced. It was one I'd occasionally think about or rarely retell, but tonight it struck me as particularly disturbing. Maybe because it's the sort of thing you can only fully grasp the implications of when you're older, when you've seen too much of the world. I'm not sure if this story belongs here, but it's true nonetheless. I must have been around 21, back in my hometown for a brief visit. My mother, who had always been a bit off-kilter, had recently been admitted to a psychiatric hospital. It wasn't the first time. She'd had her breakdowns before, but this time was different. This time she wasn't coming home. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to see her, to make sure she was all right, to let her know I was still there for her, even if it meant facing the cold sterility of that place. The hospital was on the outskirts of town, an old, imposing building that looked like it had been there forever, watching over the lives that passed through its doors. It was late afternoon when I arrived, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow the place whole. I almost turned back, but I knew I couldn't. I walked in and was greeted by the smell of disinfectant and something else, something faint and unpleasant that lingered just beneath the surface. The receptionist, a woman with a tired face and a forced smile, asked for my name and the purpose of my visit. I told her I was there to see my mom. She nodded, her smile faltering for just a second, and pointed me down a long hallway. As I walked, the sense of unease grew stronger. The walls were lined with doors, each one closed, silent. Occasionally, I'd hear a muffled voice or a distant cry, but mostly it was just quiet, too quiet. I reached the end of the hallway, where another nurse directed me to a small waiting room. "The doctor will see you shortly," she said, then left me alone. I sat there, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong, but the more I tried, the more it grew. I waited for what felt like hours, but nobody came. No doctor, no nurse, not even my mom. I stood up, thinking maybe I'd missed something, and walked back into the hallway, but it wasn't the same hallway anymore. The doors were different, older somehow, and the walls seemed to stretch on endlessly in both directions. I tried to find my way back, but each turn I took only led to more hallways, more doors. I called out, but my voice sounded hollow, absorbed by the thick, oppressive air. Panic set in. I started opening doors at random, hoping to find someone, anyone, but the rooms were all empty, except for the beds, each one perfectly made, as if waiting for someone. Finally, I came across a door that was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with a single chair in the center. In the chair sat a man in a white coat, his back to me. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm looking for my mother. She's a patient here." The man didn't respond. I walked closer, reaching out to tap him on the shoulder, but as I did, he slowly turned around. His face was wrong, twisted, like he was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. His eyes were empty, black holes that seemed to suck the light out of the room. "You're not supposed to be here," he whispered, his voice echoing in my head. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. I'm here to see my mom," I managed to say. He shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. "You're mistaken," he said. "You're not visiting. You're a patient." I tried to protest, to explain, but the words wouldn't come out. He stood up, towering over me, and for the first time, I noticed the chart in his hand. My name was written on it, clear as day. "No, this is a mistake," I stammered, but deep down, a part of me wondered if he was right. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me, and the lights flickered out. I was plunged into darkness, surrounded by the sound of whispers, voices all around me, closing in. I ran, blindly, crashing into walls, into furniture, until I burst through another door, into a brightly lit room. The sudden light blinded me, and it took a moment for my eyes to adjust. When they did, I found myself standing in the middle of a garden. It was beautiful, peaceful even, with flowers in full bloom and a soft breeze rustling the leaves. For a moment, I thought I was safe, that I'd escaped whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into. But then I noticed the people. They were all around me, sitting on benches, walking the paths, but they were wrong, just like the man in the chair. Their faces were vacant, their eyes dull, and they moved with a slow, unnatural grace. I backed away, but they didn't seem to notice me. It was as if I wasn't even there. And then I saw her, my mom, standing at the far end of the garden, looking just as she had the last time I'd seen her. I called out to her, but she didn't react. I ran to her, but the closer I got, the more I realized it wasn't her. Couldn't be. She was too still, too perfect, like a statue. I reached out to touch her, but my hand passed right through. It hit me then. I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I wasn't even in the real world. Somehow, I'd crossed over into some other realm, a place where the dead lived on, but not as themselves, as shadows, echoes of who they once were. I don't know how long I've been here, wandering this place, searching for a way out, but every door I open leads back to the garden, to those same faces, those same empty eyes. I'm starting to forget what the real world was like, starting to forget who I was before. All I know now is that I'm trapped, caught between worlds, in a place where time has no meaning, where the dead walk among the living, and the living are never truly alive. And the worst part? I don't even know if I'm one of them anymore.
I had never been much of a party person, but when you're in New York City, there's a kind of energy that pulls you in, like a magnet. It was a Friday night, and I was restless, itching to do something other than the usual routine. My friend Alex had texted me about this underground party happening in some old warehouse in Brooklyn. "You've gotta come," he'd said, "it's gonna be epic." So, against my better judgment, I decided to go. I threw on some clothes, grabbed my jacket, and hopped on the subway. The city was alive, buzzing with the sounds of car horns, distant laughter, and the hum of the train beneath me. By the time I got to the address Alex had sent, the streets were quieter, more eerie than the lively chaos of Manhattan. The warehouse was unassuming, just a large, dark structure with no signs or indications of what lay inside. But as I approached, I could hear the muffled thump of music seeping through the walls. I texted Alex, but there was no reply. I figured he was already inside, probably lost in the crowd. So I walked in. The interior was nothing like I expected. It was massive, with high ceilings and a labyrinth of rooms and corridors, each one more dimly lit than the last. The music was louder here, a deep, pulsing beat that seemed to vibrate through the floors. The crowd was a mix of people, some dressed to the nines, others more casual, but all with this strange intensity in their eyes. I wandered through the rooms, looking for Alex, but it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Every room I entered seemed to lead to another, and then another, until I was completely disoriented. The people around me danced and mingled, but there was something off about them. They moved in sync with the music, but their expressions were blank, almost robotic. After what felt like hours, I finally found Alex. He was standing by a bar, drink in hand, looking oddly serene. I rushed over to him, relieved to see a familiar face. "Alex!" I shouted over the music, but he just stared at me with this vacant look. It was like he didn't even recognize me. I tried again, louder this time, but he didn't react. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Panic started to set in. I tried to follow him, but the more I pushed through the crowd, the further away he seemed to get. It was as if the warehouse was growing, expanding, with more and more rooms and people I didn't know. I decided it was time to leave, but that's when things got even stranger. No matter which way I turned, I couldn't find the exit. Every hallway, every door I opened, led to another room, another party. I started asking people for directions, but they either ignored me or gave me these cryptic, nonsensical answers. Hours turned into what felt like days. My phone was dead, and there were no windows, no clocks, nothing to tell me what time it was. The party never stopped. The music never changed. And the people, those strange, expressionless people, kept dancing, kept drinking, as if they were trapped in some endless loop. It wasn't until I looked into a mirror in one of the bathrooms that I realized the truth. I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. The reflection was me, but not me. My eyes were vacant, my face pale, and there was a darkness under my eyes that hadn't been there before. I looked just like the others. I was just like the others. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was stuck. Stuck in this never-ending party, a ghost of who I used to be. I don't know how long it's been since I walked into that warehouse, but I know I'm still here, still wandering those endless rooms. And back home, they're probably still looking for me, wondering where I disappeared to. But they'll never find me. Because I never left.